I'm sure many people out there have already dissected the stories of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask many times over. Probably nothing I'm going to be saying in this video is anything new, but I still want to talk about this stuff as I find it personally interesting. But because I'm sure this is well-trodden territory, I'm not going to go over absolutely everything here. We're just going to talk about the stuff that I find especially intriguing about the stories of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and more specifically, the story of the Hero of Time, as I find it to be rather compelling, surprisingly. Like I said in my other Ocarina of Time video, I didn't really think much of it previously, but upon re-examining the story of Ocarina of Time, I realized that there's quite a nice little theme here, and it extends into Majora's Mask pretty nicely. One of the things that these Zelda games do that a lot of other ones don't is they give Link actual characterization. Not very much of it, but a little bit, just enough to get the idea of the story across in a fairly effective way, I would say. You do need to mull things over a bit and really absorb the ideas of the story for it to really reveal itself to you, but once you do that, it's pretty friggin' good. Now, what I have seen a lot of people talk about in regards to this game's story is that Ocarina of Time is a coming-of-age story. It's about growing up. And while that is partially correct, I think there is an added layer there that sometimes, at least from what I've seen, gets overlooked. Yes, it is a coming-of-age story, but it doesn't frame that in a positive light. The game presents this as a negative thing because it's about someone being forced to grow up when they shouldn't be. Something I've always found a bit odd about Ocarina of Time, both the game itself and the way people talk about it, is you hear so many people talking about how Link matures over the course of the game. You know, NPCs say that you've grown into a fine man, Link, you've become so much mature. But that's not really true. Just because Link is in an adult's body doesn't mean that he's more mature. 7 years may have passed, but his mind basically gets transported into the future. He is a child in an adult's body. He doesn't have that 7 years of extra life experience that makes him wiser and more mature. He's the same person, so everyone telling him how mature he's gotten has always seemed a bit off to me. But now I realize that the whole time travel gimmick of this game, of Link being in an adult's body, is an external representation of Link's internal growth. No, he did not get those 7 years of extra life experience that would make him into an adult, but he still does become an adult in a sense. Link is a child of unfortunate circumstances that essentially rob him of his childhood. There's a reason this game so explicitly lays out Link's origin of a Hylian mother that was escaping from war. She came to the Kokiri Forest, and the Great Deku Tree saw that this child was destined for something very important, and so raised him as a Kokiri. That destiny, Link's important role in everything, Zelda's dream that she has about the green boy with a fairy coming from the forest, those are burdens that were placed upon Link simply due to the nature of his birth. His destiny creates responsibility that he must carry on his shoulders, and as an extension, he must become able to fulfill that responsibility, even if it means his own personal suffering. The non-optional price that Link must pay to fulfill his destiny is to be robbed of his childhood, to grow up much sooner than anyone should have to. I think this is all pretty well represented at the beginning of the game. Starting in the Kokiri Forest, we have all the other kids, and they're out and about having a good time playing. And at first, the player is doing the same thing, but you immediately have to get the sword and shield and go talk to the Great Deku Tree about much more serious matters. What for Link may have started as an average everyday playing with his friends gets derailed and turned into something very different. He is confronted with all this turmoil in the world of Ganondorf and what he's up to, and how Link is apparently someone special that needs to solve this problem. And what's especially effective, I think, is that multiple times in this early portion of the game, Link is asked if he understands the importance of what he's doing and if he's ready and willing to take on this quest. And while the player can say yes or no, they don't really have a choice. Saying no will just loop around until you say yes eventually, or even cause a game over. you don't actually have a choice here. And we can see that Link does start this journey more childish and innocent, but is more quote-unquote mature by the end of it. When you get the spiritual stones of fire and water, both times the game has a specific mention of how you don't understand what Darunia and Ruto are talking about when they give you the stone. In the case of Darunia, he's talking about making Link an honorary Goron, and in the case of Ruto, she's talking about marriage. And when you think about it, it comes off as a little weird that the game is telling the player what they do or do not understand. But it's doing that because you are taking the role of Link in this, and it's trying to put you in his mindset. Link does not understand these things. That's what I was talking about. That's actual, concrete characterization for Link in this game. And why is that there? Why does the game feel the need to tell you that Link doesn't understand these things? Because then it serves as a contrast for later in the game in the adult section where you're being told very different things. You know, she talks about how childhood emotions turn to deep affection. Darunia mentions how Link turned out to be a real man, just like he knew he would. And in these later interactions, the game doesn't try to tell the player that they don't understand these things, implying that they do understand them now. While it's a bit expedited and abstracted for video game purposes, I think this is clearly meant to represent Link growing as a person, being introduced to all these new things as a child, not really getting them, but being forced rapidly to mature and grow up to meet the needs of his destiny, to where he now does understand these things, even though he still really is a child, but inside, mentally, he isn't anymore. We can see this shift in Link's mentality in how he responds to Ganon throughout the game. Link has a dream of him confronting Ganon, and he's just a child, and he's terrified. But then, when that ends up happening a bit way through the journey, Link feels more confident, more capable. He's ready to stand up to Ganon, but he's still no match for him. He is not ready to face Ganon yet. He has not grown enough. But then, by the end of the game, after everything that Link has experienced, now he is mature enough. Now he is ready to confront Ganon. Ganon in Ocarina of Time, pretty clearly to me, represents any obstacle or challenge or whatever in life that is simply too much for a kid to handle. And to be able to conquer that challenge, you have to stop being a kid. The kinds of things Link encounters over his journey gives him that life experience that toughens him and leads him to growing beyond his previous childhood ways. Each of the spiritual stones, I think, represent a big lesson that Link needs to learn as he grows up. You know, with the first one, he watches his father figure, the Great Deku Tree, die in front of him. That is not something that a child should see, you know? But it makes him confront the dark reality of the world that exists beyond the Kokiri Forest. At Death Mountain, Link meets the Gorons, and I think they're supposed to represent traditional masculinity. You know, they're supposed to teach Link manliness. The Gorons are big and tough and strong. They eat rocks. Darunia pounds his chest throughout his animations. When they talk about him being an honorary Goron, becoming a brother, that's supposed to be, I think, Link being introduced to those ideas of the male bond. The Gorons are Link's introduction to the idea of not being a boy, but a man. And of course, Zora's Domain and everything with Ruto is Link being introduced to love and being attracted to someone, things that he's never encountered before. And when you think about things like this, it makes a lot of the aspects of Ocarina of Time a lot more sad. Like when you go back to the Kokiri Forest as an adult and they don't recognize Link, because the Kokiri don't grow up, and we learn that Link is not a Kokiri, he's a Hylian, which is why he is able to grow into an adult, but why all of Link's childhood friends are still children. However, thematically, what is that really saying? It's that over the course of his adventure, Link has been forced to mature, to become an adult, even though he is still a kid. His internal mental state is being reflected physically, and when his friends say they don't know who he is anymore, that's because he's no longer a child like they are. They are still children. Saria talks about this multiple times throughout the game, that she always knew Link was different from her other friends, and that they could never live in the same world, because the Kokiri, as eternal children, they represent childhood itself, and Link cannot live in that world. Link has to live in the world of adults. And you could try to frame that in a positive way, saying that Link is growing up while his friends aren't. He's maturing and growing. But the thing is, Link is still a child, and there's nothing wrong with a child being a child. In fact, of course, it's a good thing. A child should be allowed to have their childhood, to grow and develop and learn in the way that a child does, and you transition into adulthood when the time is right. But sometimes, for some people in unfortunate circumstances, they don't get that. They don't get to have a childhood. They're forced to struggle, they're forced to face traumatic things that a child should not be dealing with, they're forced to take on responsibilities that a child is not ready for. It is, unfortunately, just a thing that happens. And the story of Ocarina of Time is about how sad that is, and the game says this very explicitly at the very end. After defeating Ganon, Zelda sends Link back to regain his lost time, to have the childhood that was stolen from him due to his destiny and the responsibilities that he was forced to take on due to circumstances. You know, some people, they just get an unlucky draw, and they're just born into a life situation where they don't get a childhood. And while Ocarina of Time tries to end things off on a more positive note by sending Link back and giving him the chance to have that childhood that was taken from him, when we go to Majora's Mask, we see that that isn't how things play out. Now, in Majora's Mask, Link takes a bit of a back seat compared to Ocarina of Time. This is really Skull Kid's story, but Link does play an important part in it that I think does ultimately end up forwarding his character as well. But first, let's talk a bit about the message behind Majora's Mask. And again, I'm sure this has been talked to death by a million people, so I'm going to try to go through this relatively quick. The story of Majora's Mask is about letting your pain turn you into a monster. You know, at the beginning of things, you have the 4 giants who choose to protect the people of Termina, and they're friends with the Skull Kid. But when they choose to take on that responsibility, they're forced to separate, to take on these positions in the 4 cardinal directions of Clocktown to protect the people. But Skull Kid's like, whoa, hey guys, where are you going? Why is everybody leaving? And it made the Skull Kid very lonely and angry at the people of Termina for making his friends abandon him. And so the Skull Kid started playing tricks on the people of Termina. And I like to think that things started off relatively harmless, but I imagine escalated over time, until eventually the people of Termina couldn't take it anymore, and they asked the giants to deal with the Skull Kid. At which point the giants threatened the Skull Kid like, hey bro, knock it off or you're gonna have some problems. And that just made the Skull Kid feel even worse, because now his friends had turned against him. And this is, I think, where Majora's Mask comes into the picture, because I think that thematically, Majora's Mask represents that hatred, that anger that can boil up in someone. Skull Kid putting on the mask is him fully embracing those harmful feelings, wallowing in his own self-pity, and escalating his simple tricks to doing things that are really mean and harmful and dangerous. But when wearing Majora's Mask, when giving in to that hatred and anger, you don't care. In fact, you enjoy making them suffer because they deserve it because of what they did to you. One of the things that I really like about Majora's Mask is that almost every problem every NPC in the game is facing is in some way Skull Kid's doing. You know, he's the one that stole Lulu's voice. He's the one that killed the Deku Butler's son. He's the one that turned Cafe into a child. He did almost all of it, and for no reason other than basically just to be mean. He wanted to hurt everyone because he believes they hurt him. He thinks of everyone else as the bad guys, the ones that are against him. That's why at the end of the game, if you get the Fierce Deity mask, when you're talking to the child wearing Majora's Mask, it says that we're going to play good guys and bad guys, and you're the bad guy, which means you run from what I'm going to do to you. And of course, dropping the moon on Termina is the ultimate escalation of everything. Everyone's against me, everyone's a bad guy, so I'm gonna take all of them out. I'm gonna destroy everything and kill everyone, because that's what they deserve for hurting me. And you can see these things reflected in all the children at the end of the game wearing the masks of the bosses. They all betray the thoughts of the Skull Kid. Do your friends really think of you as a friend? Does doing the right thing make people happy? Is what makes you happy what makes other people happy? These are the doubts of someone who is in a very unhealthy mental state, who is not looking at things clearly and seeing what's really happening. And we see that at the end of the game. When Majora's Mask has been defeated and all the power is sapped from it, then Skull Kid is back to normal, and he learns that the giants still did think of him as a friend. The whole catalyst to everything that he did was just in his head. He believed that his friends were abandoning him because they wanted nothing to do with him anymore, when that wasn't true. The Skull Kid was lonely, and when you're lonely, you assume the worst in other people all the time. Why did the 4 giants leave the Skull Kid back then? It must be because of something he did. They never thought of him as a friend, they never cared about him. When you're lonely, it's easy to make these kinds of assumptions, and they lead you down a dark path of making choices that hurt both you and others. You say, fine, I don't need them. In fact, I'm better off without them. And you start being hostile to others because you assume the same thing about everyone, pushing people away and making yourself even lonelier. But when you take things too far, that can be the time when you realize that people do care about you, and that no one is your enemy, and that it's all in your head, and you're creating it for yourself. The mask salesman has a nice final word on things, that whenever there's a meeting, there will eventually be a parting, but it is up to you whether that parting is forever or not. Thinking about how this whole story was kicked off by the giants leaving to go guard the people of Termina, that can represent any friends that begin drifting apart from each other for whatever reason. Maybe for work, maybe for relationships, maybe for other responsibilities, maybe for problems. When you're lonely, it's easy to assume that the people you care about are drifting away because they don't think you're important enough to maintain a relationship with. But most of the time, that's not the case. It's just that people get caught up in other things in their lives that they start to lose grip on other things. But when you drift apart from someone, you don't have to let that be how things end. You can make the effort. You can try to reconnect with them. You can try to keep your relationship alive. And this now is where Link comes into the picture, because what is he doing at the very beginning of this story? He's looking for Navi. They went their separate ways at the end of Ocarina of Time after fulfilling their duty, but Link wants to reconnect with his dear friend. He already knows the lesson he teaches Skull Kid throughout this game, that people will drift apart, but that doesn't mean you're not still friends. When you look at this whole thing from Skull Kid's side, it's very easy to see it all as very childish. It's basically a temper tantrum that's gone out of control. But then Link comes in as essentially the voice of reason, the one that rights all of the wrongs that Skull Kid has done. And this is what I meant when I said that Zelda's intention for Link of allowing him to have the childhood he was supposed to have doesn't really work out. On a literal level, he doesn't go back to the innocent, carefree life of a child in Kokiri Forest. He's going on another adventure, saving the world again from a massive threat. But more substantially, I think a lot of what you do in Majora's Mask demonstrates a lot of emotional maturity, not befitting of a child. The ways in which Link helps people in this game, he's not just solving their problems by beating the monsters or whatever, he is offering people peace, he is giving them emotional stability or comfort. He is showing the understandings of the complex emotions that people feel in times of turmoil, what Skull Kid is not doing. You could say that some of it Link is just doing because he's a heroic person and he wants to help people, but some of the things that he does here aren't really heroic. They're just nice, caring things to do for a person. Like the guy at Romani Ranch, his plight is that he's sad that he's not going to get to see all of his chicks grow up. So Link gives him that opportunity that he doesn't think he's gonna have. That has nothing to do with saving the world or being a hero. That's just empathizing with somebody. And of course, the whole Anju and Cafe thing. In Ocarina of Time, we were told that Link didn't understand things like love and marriage, but clearly now he does understand how important that is to people. Zelda might have sent Link back to get the childhood that was taken from him, but it didn't change the fact that Link still experienced everything from Ocarina of Time, and they've changed him as a person. The maturing that he was forced to go through in that game is not undone, and he still feels the effects of it. Ironically, in Ocarina of Time, you are a child in an adult's body, but I would argue that in Majora's Mask, Link is now an adult in a child's body. That is why he comes into this world that he has nothing to do with, Termina, and he sees all of the trauma being done, all of the pain, all the suffering that was caused by this child, by the Skull Kid, and he fixes that. And I think the Fierce Deity mask really represents this very well, because how do you get the Fierce Deity mask? You have to turn in all the other masks that you acquire throughout the game. And how do you get the majority of these masks? You get them by helping people in one way or another. And I believe that doing everything in this game and getting the Fierce Deity mask is like the canon true ending version of events. Because when the credits are playing, we see all the people that you've helped through your journey, and if you didn't do some of those side quests, then when they show off those characters, that part of the credits is just a black screen. The Fierce Deity mask is not just 100% reward, it is the game acknowledging that you have done things the way Link would have done them. Link is a kind, caring, mature person that wants to help everyone he can, including the Skull Kid. And the Fierce Deity mask represents that, all of the kindness that you've shown to everyone, and all the happiness that you give to the people of Termina, that is brought to life in this mask, that when you confront now the Skull Kid, the cause of everything, his dark power, his hatred, his anger is nothing compared to Link's light, his kindness. The power of the Fierce Deity is the internal power of Link to help people, and I think the fact that it's represented with his adult form is to show that that is who Link really feels like he is on the inside. And so, the story of the Hero of Time is both tragic, but also uplifting in a way. He is, unfortunately, a person that never got to have a childhood. He was born into just unlucky circumstances that meant that he had responsibilities that he had to take on from a very young age. And even when given a second chance to have that childhood, it was simply too late. The damage had been done, and there was no way to recover that. But instead, he found a way to turn that experience into something positive and to allow himself to grow from it. And because of that, he became a source of positivity to everyone around him. It's quite an interesting and ambitious story for these kinds of games made for kids. And it certainly gives a lot more characterization than you would expect for someone who is literally a nothing self-insert character in most cases. I've been asked a number of times which Link is my favorite, and I'd probably say the Hero of Time, because he's one of the only ones that's a real character with a real story to tell. Now, seeing all this, it's given me such a greater appreciation of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. Really, my only criticisms with this whole thing is I feel that within the themes of Majora's Mask, it would have been nice if at the very end, Link did reunite with Navi, because that's the whole inciting incident of this story, and it ties into the main message. But then that's just never resolved. We just drop that and forget about it, and that just leaves the Hero of Time on this kind of unsatisfying note. But also, in that same vein, It makes me even more wish we had gotten a third Ocarina Zelda game. Give us one final game with the Hero of Time to properly send off that character and give him a good ending, you know? Especially now that we know his ultimate fate as the Hero Shade in Twilight Princess. Telling the story at the end of the Hero of Time's life and giving him some closure, I think would be really cool. Man, listen to me advocating for Zelda story stuff. I used to think this series had nothing worth talking about when it came to story, but oh, I was so very wrong, and I'm so happy about it.